Shade Gardening presented by the UC Master Gardeners of El Dorado County. My name is Pam Lane and I will be your host for the class today. Our mission is to extend research-based knowledge and information on home horticulture, pest management, and sustainable landscape practices to our community. Today's class is part 2 of a 2-part series. Our class is being presented by UC Master Gardener Mary Campbell and Susan Corey McAlpine. We have a poll posted to get to know you a bit, and we would appreciate you completing this poll now. Okay, as you guys are completing the poll, the presentation will be about an hour and a half long. And we appreciate and encourage questions, and we'll do our best to address all of them at the end of the presentation through chat. We do have a couple of questions from last week's class that we're going to go through at the beginning of the presentation, and then we're going to start the presentation in its entirety. Since we have quite a number of participants today, we have muted everyone and turned video off except for the presenters. Did you all respond to the poll? If yes, thanks so much. If not, please do that now.
What's the poll?
Okay, so the poll answers. How did you hear about this class? 23% heard about the class on social media. 54% heard about the class on Master Gardener e-News, and 23% heard it from a different source. Where do you live? 38% live in El Dorado County, 23% live in Amador County, 23% live in another Northern California county, and 15% live in Central California. So now we know the demographics of our attendees. And today's class is being recorded and we're streaming Facebook Live. So if you are joining us on Facebook, welcome. Please like and comment, ask questions, and invite your friends. So with that, I'm going to turn the class over to Mary Campbell.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming back and finishing up the session or the class on shade gardening in the foothills. Just looking at the number of people from outside El Dorado and Amador, we'll do our best to answer any questions you may have, but if it's applicable specifically to your area, we may have to defer that to your local Master Gardener office. Most every county in the state of California does have a Master Gardener office. And in those offices, you'll find people who are specialists and have studied their particular area, just as those of us have done that in the foothills and in El Dorado and Amador County. We had 2 questions remaining from last week. The first one had to do with wanting to plant pollinator plants on the north side of their house. It's almost an oxymoron because the north side of the house tends to be very deep shade or deeper shade than other areas. But believe it or not, we do have several plants that will in fact bloom and therefore are attractive for pollinators in the deep shade. One of my favorites is the what's called Brunei Macrophyla. There are some common names for it. One of the common names is Siberian bugloss or bugloss. I stick with Brunaria. I think that's even an easier name to remember than the full botanical or than the full common name. The cultivar Jack Frost is particularly adapted to deep shade. I have it growing at my place underneath a maple tree. And in the springtime, I get the prettiest little blue flowers that bloom on it, and it does bring in the pollinators at that point. Another one that I grew up with, on the north side of the house I grew up in, there was also, just to make it really easy to grow anything in there, that is being facetious, We had, in addition to the north side of the house, we had a big apple tree. And underneath that apple tree, no lawn would grow, as you can well imagine, but we did have lily of the valley growing. So if you've got something like that, lily of the valley is a wonderful little ground cover plant. It's one of my favorites. I have had some difficulty trying to get it established up here. Once it's established, it is established. But it puts out the prettiest little white bell-shaped flowers that dangle down. If you've never seen it, I would encourage you looking it up. Its botanical name is Convallaris. Let me see if I'm pronouncing that. Oh, Convallaria majalis. One point you'll see us using botanical names, not just in this class, but when you're speaking with master gardeners and they're referring to plants, many times they will use the botanical name. One of the main reasons that we do that when speaking with people who are not that versed in using botanical names, the main reason we do that is if you want to find a particular plant at a nursery anywhere, use of the common name sometimes can get you the wrong plant because several plants have the same common name. As we go through the presentation, if we think of any particularly, we'll point them out to you. One that I'm trying to remember offhand, one I was thinking of earlier. Another plant that does have flowers and will bloom in deep shade is lamium or dead nettle. There's another case of liking the botanical name rather than the common name. Dead nettle is not the most attractive name, but it does put out pretty little flowers, little pink flowers at times. One of my favorites, I had never grown it, so I decided to experiment with it. So I just got one plant, put it in underneath my maple tree, and it's still growing in there. I found through reading on this, it really likes a little more shade than it gets because where the maple tree is situated, it really allows the early morning sun to come in and hit any of the plants that are underneath the maple tree. But if you haven't looked at it, lungwort, there's another name, lungwort, is one that's found is a good plant underneath a maple tree or any other deeper shade. It's pulmonaria is its botanical name. And for the specific cultivar is Lewis Palmer. Last but not least, or actually there are two more that are particularly capable of flowering underneath in deeper shade, is a Tiarella. Tiarella is commonly known as foam flower. Where some of these common names come from, I love them. Tiarella cordifolia is really very pretty. It's evergreen, fully hardy in our zones, in USDA zones 4 to 9, so you've got lots of opportunity there. And it will do well in full or partial shade. It does like well-drained soil, and it tends to use a bit more water than we like to use, especially a drought situation like we have this year. And then the last one is Trillium. Trillium is a pretty little spring growing plant, I'm sorry, and one that does very well in deeper shade. Sorry, there's one more plant, and that's Salomon Seal. If any of you are familiar with the Sherwood demonstration garden, we have a Salomon Seal growing in the deeper shade that we have underneath our oak tree. The botanical on that is Polygonatum, and it's a hybrid, and it's a wonderful plant, and it too has sort of pendulous bell-shaped flowers. It's a delightful plant, and has I like the leaf shape on it. It is deciduous, however, so don't expect to see leaves on it in the winter months. And with that, I'll turn it over to Susan for the second question. Susan, do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, that'd be great, Mary. Thanks.
One of the first questions we got that you stumped us with last week was, what can you grow in a yard as a ground cover that you can walk on and have your children play on and step on that will take that type of traffic? Both Susan and I drew a blank, but we did do some research. So Susan now has some answers for you.
The first place I went was one of my favorite go-to references, which is the Sunset Western Garden book. And we use that a lot because a lot of people do have access to it. There's a section in the front of the Western Garden book that talks about ground covers, and it has a list of 9 ground covers, about 6 of which can grow in shade and substitute for lawns. Now, some of them are fairly tall ground covers, like 6 inches or so. But I did find a few that are flat on the ground. And for the others, I'd refer you to page 60 of the Sunset Western Garden book for the other part of the list. So the best we could do is light shade. None of these grow in heavy, dense shade. Most of them take sun additionally. The first one I found was a mini creeping thyme, 1 to 3 inches tall, grows best between pavers, so that's big flagstones, and it's fairly durable. It grows in sun and partial shade. The second one is also a thyme. It's called silver needle thyme. Pretty much the same specifications as the mini creeping thyme. And these will bounce back after traffic. If they're 3 inches tall and they get crushed, they'll grow back, or they will spring back. One interesting one that I found was called Mesos Reptans. That's M-A-Z-U-S. It's also in the Sunset Western Garden book, and it takes heavy foot traffic. It's a perennial. It grows in sun and part shade. It needs regular water and rich soil. But apparently it's a Himalayan native, and it grows under snow, comes back in the spring, and it can tolerate heavy foot traffic. So that's one that I didn't know about. So for the rest of that list, the front part, page 60 of your Sunset Western Garden book, be careful that you're looking at the ones that take partial shade. And as I said, none of them take full shade. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. It's a tough question. You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, shall we get into it? Last week, we covered some of the basics of growing in shade, particularly went over the definitions of what the varying types of shade are. Basically, if you think about it, shade is the absence of light. So the degrees of shade that you end up with are just that. They're absence of light at particular times or in particular locations, such as the north side of the house. One of the things that I really, really like about shade gardening is the fact that there's so many variations of shade. If you're dealing with sun plants, that's just it. You're dealing with sun plants. They all grow in full sun pretty well. But when you start getting into shade, there's so many different variations. There's morning shade, and then there's afternoon shade, or there's dappled shade, or there's dense shade, or there's shade that's on the side of a structure, but you get the reflected light from the structure if it's painted in a light color. That really opens up the possibilities. And when you start thinking about all of the things that you can plant, depending upon what your situation is with shade, There are a lot of options. What we'll do to finish up the presentation today really is to go over many of the plants that will grow in some degree of shade. But before we get there, I can get my there we go. Last week, we just covered at a high level what some of your design considerations are. When we look at design considerations, I wanted to go into more detail this week as a lead in then to all of the plants we'll show you. Layout, you want to make sure that you include some understory trees and shrubs. One of my favorites is a dogwood. We have two types of dogwood growing at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. One is the Western flowering dogwood, and the other one is the Kusa dogwood, K-O-U-S-A. Both do very well out there in the shade. One of the Kusa dogwoods is getting some afternoon sun that it probably would be happier without. And yet in our Japanese garden at the demonstration garden, we have a Kusa dogwood that's growing more in full sun. They are still doing quite well, even though they're in full sun. This bottom picture that you see is just a good illustration of some combinations where you've got your tree and then you've got the shrubs that are living nicely along it. I don't have that clear enough picture to say positively, but I know the red one's an azalea. Just an example for you. The other thing about layout is that you really do want to plant in odd numbers. In this instance, most of them, like this one, really is a 3 number, 3. That is a wonderful anemone that grows in the demonstration garden. Down at the bottom, thanks to Susan bringing us a bunch from her house, we have planted bleeding heart or Dicentra spectabalis at the demonstration garden. This really is a very nice shady plant because it blooms beautifully in the spring and then begins to die down early in the summer. Doesn't like the heat of the summer, so it goes dormant early. The third picture up here with the yellow, goldish yellow plant is a picture of what one of our master gardeners took when she visited a botanical garden in the Central American country of Grenada. The plants that you're seeing here are Angel's Trumpet. If you grow Angel's Trumpet, which you can in parts of El Dorado County particularly, be sure to know that it is poisonous in all of its areas. So I would suggest you don't plant it when you have pets or children. Additional considerations that you want to take in when you're thinking of your plantings is you want to take in color. These 3 again are just 3 of many colorful plants that you can plant in shade. One of my favorites is the one on the right with the purple and the yellow, Johnny Jump Up. But really, and that is a viola, is its botanical name. And all violas will grow in some degree of shade. There's a native viola that does fantastically, and I have it at my house growing as a ground cover, and it just happily spreads. The bottom picture is that of one of my favorite plants called a hellebore. Believe it or not, that's one of its common names, Hellebore. Its botanical name is Helleborus, most commonly known as either Christmas rose or Easter rose. The thing I love about that plant, or these plants, I should say, is the fact that they do bloom in the early spring. They'll come up out through the snow where I live and start blooming happily away at times, just depending upon how late we've got the snow. Hardscape is a major consideration that you have to look at. On the top left, on the top really, you see a pathway. Pathways are always considered hardscape. Whether you do them with flat stones or you do them with concrete, flat pavers, or you do them as we have at the demonstration garden with decomposed granite. Any of those would be considered a hardscape. And depending upon how you set your hardscape pathway, you can get some real interest in your design. The one thing that you do want to avoid, I would suggest, is that you don't want to have a complete straight line pathway. It's much more interesting if you get some curvature to it. Underneath the picture of the pathway, you'll see a fountain. The fountain, this picture is the fountain that we have at our entranceway at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. And it's not only is the fountain there as a focal point, but then planted around it, we have some really interesting plants. The picture on the right, is it on your right? Yeah, it would be on your right, is another hardscape item, and that's an arbor. In this case, the arbor is pictured at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden, coming out of the rose garden. Our rose garden does have the arbors at each of its entry points, and then it also has a shelter in the center. All of those are considered hardscape. Some more hardscape. Boulders. Boulders can just be absolutely wonderful. If you're lucky like I am, you'll have several large boulders that I'm sure were here and left here when the house was actually constructed. In this case, this is probably, this picture with the boulders here was provided by one of our master gardeners, and I'm not sure, I neglected to ask her if she had those brought in or if they were there in place. It looks like they were probably brought in, especially the ones on the left of that picture. Those definitely are not boulders, those are concrete dividers. The structure underneath the boulders is what we call our shelter in progress. We have a group of master gardeners who specialize in handling the hardscape at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden, and they have been working diligently for months putting this structure up, which will hopefully by springtime, when we can start opening the garden again, and hopefully able to offer it to more than 10 people at a time, we will use it for classes and for special things that if we want to do a demonstration of some type. I would suspect that when we do a vermicompost or worm composting class, this would be an ideal place to do it because it will provide some relief from the sun. When it's completed, it will have the ability to have sides that drop down. It will have a roof on it so that you won't get rained on. All of the work that you see on the wall, and then if you were able to see well into the lower part or the flooring part of the pergola, you'd see the stonework. It's all being done by volunteers. They're doing a fantastic job and working really hard. And then of course, any type of statuary that you place in your garden would be considered hardscape. So I hope this gives you a few examples. We talked about wanting more examples last week, and we're trying to provide them for you. Oops, I put that in twice, didn't I? Here's another one on color. This color just gets to you mostly through the leaves. There don't have to be any flowers in order to bring color into a garden. The one on the left is a wonderful osmanthus, is its botanical name. I'm so accustomed to calling plants by botanical, I forget its common name. On the right is a red twig dogwood. And again, you're getting color strictly through foliage and in the branches. That's why it's called a red twig. The bottom is one of many, 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 many Japanese maples or Acer palmatums. And texture. Who has often felt, like I have, the fuzzy, fuzzy leaves of a wonderful plant called Stachys officinalis, commonly called rabbit's ear. One of the things about a fuzzy-leaved plant is that the deer tend not to like it. They don't like the texture feel on their tongue for some reason. The picture in the bottom right is different leaves, types of leaves that give you some texture differences. You've got the very nice shrub on top that's got the very small leaves. I'm sure it's very soft feeling, or it certainly looks to be soft. But if you look down at the very bottom, we've got a hosta growing there, hostas, there's several in there. And their leaves tend to be smoother when you feel them. Our dead nettle again is on the left. I'm sorry, that's a cyclamen, isn't it? The cyclamen, one of the things I like about that, see the serration that you have on the leaves? You can almost feel a little bit of serration. Another thing that I would point out, I didn't use this back on the color slide, but I could have. Look at the amount of color that you get off of that particular plant just in the variations of green. Down on the bottom is one of the favorite plants, I believe, of you, Susan, is it not? The Serbian bellflower. We have that as well planted at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. And again, look at the serrated leaves. Much, much more serrated than the ones up in the top left. And some ground covers to consider for dry shade. Red barrenwort is a spring plant that's great. Epimedium rubrum, you need to ask for it by that name. But barrenwort is another one of those strange names. I would not think it would be a great common name, but many people know it. On the right, geranium, and I can't see the full botanical because I've got a picture of the mycorrhizum. Cranesbill is its common name, and it really does live up to its the fact that it's a ground cover. It's fairly low growing. It's not what I would call a low growing ground cover. It's probably about 1.5 to 2 inches. We have it growing in the shade garden at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. And it does spread a bit. So if you want a ground cover that's going to do a little spreading without being invasive, this is a good one. Is there another one? Yeah, there it is. One that we use fairly often at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden is the strawberry, the woodland strawberry. It tends to like some shade. The common name, and it's a native, as you'll notice, it's Fragaria californica. If you see the name californica in a botanical name, you can be pretty certain it's a native. On the right is probably one of my favorite ground covers. It propagates very easily. We sell it frequently at the plant sales that are put on in the spring by the master gardeners of El Dorado County. Sweet woodruff, and boy, does it live up to that name. When its flowers are in bloom, you can walk through the sweet woodruff and just be surrounded by this wonderful, wonderful aroma. I can be working out in my garden even 50 feet away from the woodruff in bloom and be able to smell it. It's just a delightful, delightful ground cover. Sweet woodruff. Bed nettle or spotted nettle is another nice ground cover. Lamy Immaculatum is its botanical name. And it will delight you with its little violet colored flowers when it blooms, but it's also got wonderful color variations in its leaf structure. And Loriopes hepatica, creeping lily turf, is also another nice ground cover. Pachysandra will take varying degrees of shade, including deep shade, which makes it very nice. Its botanical name is a bit of a mouthful, but then its common name, I don't tend to like the word spurge very much. So calling it a spurge, you don't have a lot of choices there. So it's either Pachysandra or Japanese spurge. One of my favorite plants, and it really is considered a shrub, and it's probably pushing the envelope slightly to consider it a ground cover, is sweet box. And again, sweet really does describe the wonderful aroma that comes from the little white flowers that come out in late winter, early spring. I have a hard time with the botanical name. I have to almost look it up every time I have to spell it, and I never know for sure how it's pronounced, but I pronounce it Sarcococca russifolia. But anybody know better? I wish you good luck. And now we lead into the plants that'll do well in shade, in varying degrees of shade. And Susan, it's all yours at this point.
Good morning. So the first on the upper left there is Begonia semperflorens, which you may remember or have seen as a hanging plant with a tube hanging down to give it water on a lot of the buildings on Main Street here in Placerville. It is it blooms for a very long time, spring through fall. It has types that have dark foliage, which take more sun if they've got water, and they can live for years in mild climates, which is not what I think of when I think of El Dorado County. But I think that the lesson from the begonias is that if you have to baby them just a little bit, give them enough water and make sure that they don't get too much sun. Moving down to the lower left, the Heliotrope Arborescens, which, make sure I have my notes here. Heliotropium means follows the sun, and arborescens means tending to be tree-like. Clusters of tiny flowers with a sweet, delicate scent and handsome foliage. This is one, the heliotrope, needs well-drained soil. Then up on the center middle, Browalia americana, amethyst flower. This is a very good plant for warm shade. And I'm thinking we mean warm in terms of temperature, but shaded. So if you have that kind of environment, this would be a good choice. It has violet or blue flowers, about 1/2 inch long and across. So it looks as though it would put on quite a show when it blooms. Next to the right is fuchsia. And when it says Thyme's hybrid, that means any of the hybrids within the fuchsia family would be covered in this one category. Wide variety, as you probably already know, color combinations, flower and leaf sizes. But this is also one that I've seen in baskets hanging with a water source by tube. In this environment, we do consider them annuals, yes. I think it has to do a lot with the contrast between summer and winter temperatures. So we're more extreme than some of the other environments I've seen both begonias and fuchsias in, which would be, I'm thinking of Monterey with a lot of aerial humidity and a more mild summer and no cold winters. So down on the lower right, Impatiens Balsamina, which is also a delightful little flower. It's called Touch Me Not, is the common name for that. And that comes from the seed pods opening, splitting open and scattering when they're very lightly touched. They can be solid colored or variegated in leaf, many different flower forms and colors. Next slide, please. Okay, that was it for the annuals there. Oh, we do have more. Good. Okay, one of my favorites, and again, I've seen this a lot in Monterey or, seaside communities, is the lobelia. And this one in particular, the Erinus, takes light shade, regular water, comes in many different colors, blooms April through June, so long bloom time. It's an annual lobelia, so it's low growing. For baskets or for edges, it tends to drape. And I think I said it also needs regular water. To the right, you see coleus. And I think if you know coleus, you know these come in a tremendous range of colors. I had read that the more red, the color red in the leaf, the more sun the coleus can stand. But basically, we consider it a shade plant. Next, on the lower left, Torrenia Fournier, Wishbone Flower. The flowers look like miniature gloxinias. And the stamens, it gets its name, wishbone flower, from the fact that the stamens are arranged in a wishbone shape. Blooms from summer through fall. I'm sorry?
When they're in bloom, Susan, they always look to me like they're a yawning mouth.
Yeah, they kind of do, don't they? Very pretty little flower.
It is pretty.
And then the last annual that we'll show you is a nasturtium. This again, I think of when I think of seaside communities because they love moisture. But my notes say they're also somewhat drought tolerant. Leaves, flowers, and unripe seed pods are all edible, according to our notes. Okay, next slide, please. Buds, bulbs, corms, and tubers. Now I did write down the difference between these. Bulbs you probably think of as what you plant when you plant daffodils at this time of year. The bulb is a plant source, it's plant base underground that provides all of the nutrients, but also the rooting and the leaves for the next year's plant. Let's see, corms are, it's more of a swollen underground stem base. It's a flattened, looks like a flattened bulb, and it's solid tissue rather than scales or separate sections. And lastly, the tuber looks kind of like a flat little underground stem base, but they aren't organized like a corm. There's no basal plate, so roots can grow from all sides around this rather round plant part that's underground. So Arum Italication, which is on the upper left there, is a plant that grows in partial or full shade. This would be one of your plants that would do without a lot of sun, regular water during growth, but then it can go dormant in the summertime and does not need any more water. Calla-like flowers. This grows from a tuber. Flowers spring to early summer and followed by orange-red fruit. It'll naturalize, which you're probably familiar with that term from daffodils. That's naturalization is what happens when the plant expands by throwing out additional growth parts underground during the growing part of the year, and then will burst forth in the spring with leaves and then flowers. The next one on the lower left there is Lily of the Valley, which is a bulb. Needs light shade, regular water again during the growth phase when you first see the leaves. May need some moisture during the summer dormancy. One of the first bloomers, you can see this, it's called, the Chino, Glory of the Snow, which is the common name for Lily of the Valley, comes from its tendency to be one of the first summer bloomers. Has blue, white, or pink flowers. Upper right, oh, I'm sorry, I mixed that up. Okay, so Glory of the Snow is on your upper right there, real pretty little blue flower. And that's the one is the first of the spring bloomers, sort of like a crocus. And lower left is the Lily of the Valley, which actually grows from a rhizome or a pip, P-I-P. All parts of this, the Lily of the Valley, are poisonous if ingested. So not a good one for pets or children. And it says that it's good planted between rhododendrons and camellias. It multiplies obviously there from the picture. And then the last one on the lower right, the crocus grows from a corm. And this is the one that I see pushing up through the snow in Garden Valley where I live. Light shade. It blooms early, as I said, in the late winter, early spring. Range of colors, good planted in masses. Okay, next slide, please. The fawn lily there on the upper left, and again, as Mary said, Californicum means that it is, yes, native to Northern California. Anything with Californicum in the scientific name is a California native. Fawn lily, very pretty there. Native to Northern California, good under deciduous trees. So it will take some winter sun. Blooms in the spring. Leaves are mottled brown. On the right hand there, the dogtooth violet. You see dens canis or canis in the scientific name, which means dog tooth, tooth of the dog. Back one. There we go. So the fawn lily, I'm sorry, dogtooth violet is a bulb also. Takes light afternoon shade, which indicates maybe it'll stand a little bit more sun than others. Deep pink to purple flowers on a stem. Needs year-round moisture. Lower left, bluebell or wood hyacinth. Hyacinthinoides hispanica. So the hispanica tells you it's, there are a couple of these that you will see in this presentation. Hispanica is the one, I think the difference between the two. Hispanica means originally it came from the Spanish part of the world. And it's one of those plants that has a similar common name to another one that we'll hit later, the bluebell. Actually, it looks like white there. Has deep pink to purple flowers, sometimes on 6 to 12 inch stems, so it's a little bit taller. This also needs year-round moisture. The other bluebell that will hit, and I'll point it out when we get to the picture, but it is also in this section of bulbs. Another bluebell is another hyacinth. Look real quickly here. Okay, we will look at it in a minute. It's the bluebell is also a Siberian squill. So if you go looking for a bluebell bulb, you need to be really careful that you're getting the right kind of hyacinth. This is the wood hyacinth as opposed to the Siberian squill. And then on the lower right there, blue starflower, isn't that pretty? That is Iphidium uniflorum, blue starflower.
That's one of those
Very
that tries to take your mouth and fill it up with the words.
I'm sorry. So the blue starflower takes partial shade, which also means it takes a little bit of sun. The leaves on this one smell like onions when they're crushed, and this one multiplies very quickly. Next slide, please. Upper left there, summer snowflake, Leucojum aestivum. It looks like a little summer snowflake flower. Looks like a little, like a lily flower, but it's actually white violet. Blooms in the late winter in our highest elevations in El Dorado County. Pollock pines. Bell-shaped flowers with green tip segments. It's really pretty. Prefers dry conditions during dormancy. So when the bloom goes and the plant retreats and the leaves die back, it enters dormancy, and then it really needs to be dry and not wet. On the right-hand side, you see the spring snowflake. Let's see, spring snowflake. Okay, white violet also. This is for the colder areas of the county. Needs definite winter cold to do well, as in below 20 degrees Fahrenheit. On the lower left, Lilium, and that SPP means all these species of the lily family are kind of governed by these same parameters in this category. Lilium is a bulb also. Needs cool roots and tops in its sun or filtered light. So you have to put it someplace where it doesn't have to lean too far to get sun. It needs year-round moisture. And it's good to locate them among low-growing plants. That means your low-growing plants will keep the roots of the lily shaded and still allow the top of the flower to reach the sun. Now there's our other bluebell, Psilocyberica. Full sun during bloom, light shade after, regular water during growth and bloom on this one. The bluebell, as you can see, has flaring little bells, one of the harbingers of spring. Typical color blue, but it has varieties in white and pink also. And this one will naturalize just like your daffodils. So that means it spreads. Next for ground covers. These are ground covers as opposed to what Mary was talking about in her presentation, ground covers that do well in dry. These are ground covers that do well in a variety of moistures and also a variety of sun and shade, mostly shade. Ajuga and that SPP, again, those are all of the ajugas are sort of governed by the same properties. Partial shade and regular water on the ajuga. It throws up a little spire of really pretty purpley blue flowers. in the spring, spreads really quickly by runners, and it will escape unless it's contained. Most of the flowers on this one are blue. Across from that, on the right, is Virginia cordifolia, which is a ground cover known as heartleaf Virginia or pig squeak. Turns out the pig squeak name comes from the sound that the leaf makes when you squeeze it or rub it. Let's see, pig squeak. This is evergreen, except in the coldest climates. So it's good with ferns, hostas, and hellebores. A very pretty little flower there. It will endure neglect, poor soil, and some drought.
And
Typically blooms. I'm sorry.
It also doesn't mind growing in full shade.
Ah. We'll have to amend our note on that. Okay, so partial shade on that. Down below on the left, Carex flacca, blue sedge, which is a really pretty little plant. It grows in these low mounds. The foliage may be blue or green, and it's evergreen only in the mildest climates, which wouldn't be our area on the Georgetown Divide or up where Mary lives. In pollock pines, but does better in the lower elevations. Dwarf Plumbago is one that I have in my garden in a container. And we also have this we have a lot of these actually in the Sherwood demonstration garden, but this is one that I watch a lot in the shade garden portion of the Sherwood garden. Dwarf Plumbago. It's got a really pretty foliage that turns red in the fall, and it may still be blooming. So you may have the blue flowers against the red foliage on them. It's a great plant, I think, for partial shade.
And it does die to the ground in the winter months.
Yes, we have this in the shade part of the Sherwood demonstration garden, sort of out on a fringe of the shade garden, so it gets a little bit more sun. At home, I have it in partial shade, partial sun, but it never gets a direct shaft of sunlight. Probably not in either garden. Next slide, please. Chamomile. Now this is not the plant that you make chamomile tea from. This is slightly different. It's a dwarf chamomile. It blooms in the summer, and it can be actually mowed or sheared, and it will grow right back. I remember this from the horse pasture in Danville in the hot sun, but it actually also grows in partial shade and needs moderate water. On the right-hand side, ground morning glory, Convolvulus sabatius. There we go. Ground morning glory, isn't that pretty? So morning glories tolerate some shade, but need moderate water. It has small lavender blue flowers in early summer to late fall. So it's a late summer bloomer, but blooms for a long time. And you can actually trim it in late winter to prevent it from becoming woody, just to keep the new growth blooming when it arrives in the spring. Down on the lower left here is the New Zealand brass buttons, Cotula squalida. Partial shade, moderate water for this also. It has yellow-green flower heads, and it blooms late spring to early summer. It's a really interesting sort of fern-like leaf. And on the lower right, beach or sand strawberry, which is the one that grows in dry conditions. It's considered a dry ground cover. Needs regular water though, not completely dry, and afternoon shade, best for that. This is native to the Pacific coast bluffs of North and South America. This is not a commercially grown strawberry, nor is the one that Mary talked about earlier, the wood strawberry. You can cut it back annually to force new growth and prevent stem buildup, which keeps the plant healthier. Next slide, please. Okay, we're back to Mary's favorite plant, the sweet woodruff, which I also love. Tolerates a lot of shade. So this is a partial to full shade plant. Needs regular to ample water, but also can tolerate a small amount of dryness. It is clusters of small white flowers appear above the foliage in late spring and early summer. And it spreads rapidly and I've never had this problem, but it says it can become a pest if it's allowed to grow unchecked. The next one on the right there is Houtinha Chordata, which Mary and I know from the shade garden section of the Sherwood demonstration garden. This is an interesting plant. It grows in shade, also on the fringe of shade and sun. So it can tolerate more sun than some of these plants, regular to ample water. And the reason that Mary and I know it so well is it lops over the rocks on the base of or at the top of the creek, and it starts threading these long white stems until it finds light, but it can thread stems underneath rock and ends up popping up in the dry creek bed at this time of year before we get our big rains. Down on the lower right there is creeping Mahonia. Repens actually in all of these Latin names means creeping. So if you see it repeated, you'll know that you're looking at a ground cover and not a shrub like the other Mahonias.
We have that one growing as the Sherwood demonstration garden. And at this point, I don't think it looks like a ground cover, but it is considered. There are places we found it where it's listed as a ground cover, but it tends to be a little bit taller than I would think of as a ground cover.
You think it's too tall to be considered a ground cover?
It's a little taller than I would, but then who defines something like ground cover? It's very subjective.
Yeah, it can be knee high, in other words.
One point that I think we should make about the Houtinha Chordata, the most common of those is called chameleon, but it doesn't have a true common name. Susan was very nice about what it does in terms of flapper over the boulders. It's not on the invasive plant list, but it is definitely a very, very assertive plant. I grew it, and as well as using it at the Sherwood demonstration garden, I grew it when I lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, in an area that tended to stay fairly moist most of the time. It was the lower part of the garden. And the Houtinha loved it. So it does like conditions that are a little wetter than we probably. When we planted it, we thought, no. I should say I thought I was the one who chose it, and I put it in the shade garden. And some of my fellow team members on the shade garden team have cursed me ever since. It can be very, very aggressive. So now I'm growing it at my place in pots, maintain it in the pot. So it really is a pretty plant if it weren't so, didn't have such a tendency to spread.
I actually haven't seen that many plants that go under rock to throw out their layers, and where it can sustain a kind of a whitish stem and a pale leaf until it actually breaks out from under a big rock and becomes its own plant.
Exactly.
So we had a question about the creeping Mahonia, and normally we would save those until the end, but one viewer chatted in to say that this looks like Oregon grape. And Oregon grape is actually the shrub, it's a different type. This again is a repens, Mahonia repens, which means it's lower and creeps. It spreads by creeping. But yes, the yellow flower is similar to the Oregon grape, same family. And it also, I believe this one has dark blue berries in the fall, just like the upright shrub Mahonia.
Oregon grape's botanical name is Mahonia, but the second part of it is aquifolium as opposed to repens.
So this is another example of why you need to be a little bit careful that you write down the scientific name if you're looking for a specific plant in the nursery, because you may not always see the growth pattern of the plant if you're buying it as a young plant. But if you see repens, you know it's going to be low and creeping, and if you see another type of scientific name but within the same family, you know the shape of the plant or the character of the plant will be different. Next slide, please. Here's our Japanese spurge again. Another reason to not like the spurge as part of the common name is there is an invasive I believe it's called spotted spurge. That's a ground cover that is considered invasive, and you're advised to dig that out. This is not that spurge, but spurge is.
I believe that spurge is a euphorbia, is it not?
I'm sorry?
That spurge is a euphorbia as opposed to a pachysandra.
Oh, okay. Different spurge.
I'd have to double check, but if memory serves me correctly.
So Mary has talked about the Japanese spurge. It's got a really pretty leaf.
It does.
Withstands heavy shade and is widely used under trees. So those of you, I'm not sure. No, we would not recommend this under oak trees because it does also say in the Japanese spurge description that it needs regular water. So that means that you would not want it under an oak tree. Generally, I think Mary and I agree that you don't plant anything under oak trees. It has small white non-showy flowers in the spring. So it does bloom, but the main attraction is the pretty leaf. Down on the lower left, Sagina subulata, Scotch or Irish moss, is a real delicate little ground cover. Scientific name says it's fattening, or it provides nourishment. That's somewhere there in the scientific name, because there was a belief originally that sheep fattened well on pastures where the plant grows. It is, the green form is called Irish moss. The golden green is called Scotch moss. It's not a true moss. So it won't work if you plant it in areas that have a lot of moisture. It takes partial shade, just regular water, but not ample water is the other part of that description. So ample water is where you would have your regular moss. It's a bit of a misnomer. Then on the right, Yerba Buena, which is, a lot of you know, is the original name for San Francisco, because on the San Francisco when the site was first discovered, this Yerba Buena plant, the native, was growing on all the hills in the San Francisco area. It has a strong minty scent. It does have white or lavender flowers. And again, I believe the main attraction for Yerba Buena is the attractive the attractive leaf. So again, this is one Douglasii in the scientific name that you need to take that scientific name along because there's a lot of yerba buena type plants and you want to make sure you get the right one. Next slide, please.
Went the wrong way. I'm sorry about that. I think you're finished.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Mary, I think, and she's going to talk about the most beautiful perennials for shade.
All right, let's start on perennials. We're running a little short on time if we want to get questions answered. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of plants on each of the slides. Acanthus. There are several types of acanthus. Most are referred to as bear's breech, so you may be familiar with that name. It's a fantastic, fascinating plant. We have two types in growing at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. One we have is Mollis, which is what is put here, shown here. And the other one, also known as a bear's breech, but it has a different leaf structure to it. It's more of a more serrated leaf to it than this one does. Both of them are fascinating, as you can see from that flower that it throws up. There's quite a nice several plants of the Acanthus mollis growing at the El Dorado County Fairgrounds right in front of the floriculture building. On the right, monk's hood, I would caution you, is poisonous. It really is a lovely plant, however, so we ignore the poisonous if you don't have children or pets that are going to be concerned with it. On the bottom is lady's mantle. It could almost be called a ground cover in that it does grow fairly low to the ground. Again, we've got it at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden in the shade garden, and it is doing magnificently. We put in 3. And while I'm mentioning 3, I'll answer the question from Georgina Johnston about why we planted in odd numbers. Just one way of making the planting more interesting, really more than anything else. If you constantly plant in even numbers, you're getting a very symmetrical garden. And most designs recommend that you do not stick strictly with the symmetrical design. It tends to get very repetitious after time, perhaps. It would be a halfway decent name to call it. Anemones are always great, as you see there. There's a good one showing. Another of my very favorite plants, one that will do very, very well. It propagates easily. We have it growing at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. Even it grows up in the higher elevations. I've seen it many times growing along the trail between Woods Lake and, what the heck is the name of that? Round Top, the one just below Round Top. There's quite a trail that goes up and it follows along fairly flatly and somewhat shaded as you leave Woods Lake, and you'll find columbine that grow along there. They're wonderful. And those will be the native columbine. The ones that are showing here are more of a hybrid. So if you do use the seeds and want to grow some, bear in mind you may not get the same thing that you took it from. Goat's beard's another interesting plant. I've got it planted at my house. We do not have it at the demonstration garden at this point. It tends to get fairly tall, and those wonderful white flowers tend to grow up a bit. Mine, when it was in bloom, actually stopped my niece's car from going down my driveway. One bloom on its stalk came out and just barely touched the back of her car. And it's one of those newer fancy cars that automatically stops if it detects anything that's going to get in its way. And believe it or not, it stopped. We couldn't believe it. Some other perennials that are really nice. We talked already about the Brunera. Wonderful, wonderful plant with those neat pink, beautiful little blue flowers in the springtime. And we have already mentioned the campanula or the bellflower or bluebells. Astilbe is a great shady plant and has wonderful flowers when it does bloom. It tends to like a bit more water than I want to give it at where I live, because I've got a very hilly property and I don't want to put anything in that requires a fair amount of water. But it also is a wonderful shade plant. And again, we've mentioned the bleeding hearts. The question, I noticed that question, if you can plant these under oaks, we definitely would not recommend planting them very close to the oaks, simply because even though they die down to the ground in the summer months, they do take water, more water than you probably should give the oaks. We've got them growing at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden fairly near oaks, but they're definitely out just probably towards the edge of the canopy, if I remember correctly, Susan. One point that we'll make about digitalis. Digitalis is a wonderful plant that will go in partial shade. But there is one that's considered invasive in some areas, and that's the digitalis purpurea. That's why we put that question mark or put that parenthetical comment. I love it. It's one of my favorite plants, and it grows all over my place. Down on the far right is a plant that used to be in the Ligularia family, but is now moved over to Farfugium japonicum. It is also growing at the demonstration garden. Its common name being leopard plant. It likes a fair amount of moisture, so we've put one plant only, and we put it right at the edge of our little dry creek, which is not dry whenever there's a lot of moisture. I could go out there right now, and I know because we've had so much rain that there's water running in the creek. The soil right along the edge of that tends to stay a little bit wetter than you would normally find, even though the creek itself is dry in the summer months. And then we have the ferns. The one on the bottom left, the hart's tongue fern, is one that will take some deeper shade than some other ferns will, as will the Japanese painted fern. The Japanese painted fern, I think it's the lady fern that's pictured here, but the Japanese painted fern is in the Atherium family, but it gets wonderful colors to its leaves, more so than the one that's pictured here. That's another reason we like it, is we've got it planted at the demonstration garden, the Japanese painted fern. The others that are listed here, the cinnamon fern will take more shade than the other two will. I love the cinnamon fern. To me, it's very interesting, especially with, not even sure what you call those. I should know, but I don't know what the little stakey looking things are, but they're very interesting and provide some interest into your shade garden.
I think my notes say it's called a fiddlehead. Could that be?
Well, no,
Maybe.
Fiddleheads can be eaten, for example.
Yeah.
Fiddleheads are what grow when the fern's leaves are just beginning to grow. They're wrapped in a true curl. And those curls can, I believe it's on the cinnamon fern. I'd have to double check, so don't take this as gospel. But some fiddleheads can be eaten, can be sauteed in butter, and they're wonderful. Filipendula is another nice plant that's suitable for shade, as is the Francoa, maiden's wreath. Geum is wonderful if you haven't grown it. It tends to like, I grow it in part shade. We're growing it in more sun than I have it growing. I believe it, let me just take a look here. It will grow in partial, it's considered a partial shade plant. Yet there is a geum that is growing around the entry fountain at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden. And believe me, that area gets lots of sun. There's nothing to shade it. It may get shadier now, not the way the sun goes. Even the new pergola going up will not bring shade to the fountain area. But the geum is doing beautifully in there. So when it says partial shade, bear in mind that it will take, some of them will take some sun. The one that is in the little garden around the fountain is one that has almost an apricot color blossom to it. I love it. Its common name is Avens, A-V-E-N-S. I prefer just to call it geum. That's just as easy in my book. On the bottom, you see the other two plants that I really love and that we've got an abundance of at the Sherwood Demonstration Garden, and that's the Heliotrope. The one on the left is Niger or Christmas rose, and the one on the right is Orientalis or Lenten. I called it an Easter rose earlier. My mistake. That's a Lenten rose. These plants throw out wonderful little seedlings that grow all around the mother plant. And if you've got a lot of patience, you can dig them up and pot them up, and maybe in 4 to 5 years, you'll have a plant that you can put in the ground. We do sell a lot of these at our plant sales because, again, it's one that we love so much and are willing to take the several years for it to grow in order to sell at the plant sale. Some of the perennials going on that I really like that we have growing at the demonstration garden are the coral bells or heuchera. There are many varieties of coral bells, also known as alum root. And as you can see from all of these, they're very colorful in their leaves. They have a pretty little flower stalk that comes up. It tends to grow fairly tall above the foliage and just has very teeny tiny flowers on it. So it's not really considered itself a foliage plant, or I mean a flowering plant as much as it is just a foliage plant with lots of interest. If you plant these in mass, different varieties of them, you'll get a very colorful bed or portion of a bed. Heucherella is actually a hybrid between the Tiarella, which I believe Susan talked about, and a heuchera. And as you can see, the leaves do bear some resemblance to the heucheras or coral bells, but slightly different shapes. So they're kind of a combination of both of those, the Tiarella and the heuchera. And then there's the hosta. Most of what you'll see here and what you'll see in the demonstration garden are the X hosta, meaning they're hybrids. But there are no end to the variety that you can get. Showing you the Bressingham blue there was a main reason we wanted this particular cultivar showing, and that is because the blues tend to take deeper shade, whereas the lime green, like the guacamole, tend to like lighter shade. They like more sunlight. First frost with the variegated leaves brings in a lot of color into a green garden, as does the guacamole. And with the variegation on the leaves here, again, you bring in some different colors into your garden. This one will take dappled shade, will take some sun, but not as much as the Bressingham blue. These can get fairly sizable, but there are very small hosta. There's one called mouse ears. Susan, I think you grow the mouse ears, if I remember correctly. It's a teeny tiny, just adorable little hosta.
Yes, they do look like mouse ears, and I find that they They look great in the pot, and I turned the pot over and they're already needing repotting because the little roots are coming out of the hole. But they're adorable. I have 2 sets of those, and I also have a hosta that's called Curly Fries,
Right.
which needs a little bit more sun than the rest because it has a variegated leaf with a lot of yellow. Looks very spidery.
Yeah, it does. It's cute. It's cute. There's just no end. There's the teeny tiny ones like the mouse ears, and then it goes all the way on up to one that can grow 6 feet tall. The ones we have growing in pots under the oak trees at the Sherwood demonstration garden have been in there now. They were in 4 years when we ended up dividing them last fall. Believe it or not, they had only been in there 4 years, and we ended up getting 4 or 5 different plants out of each one that we divided, simply because they liked the conditions in the pots growing under the oak trees so much that they really got big fast, which is kind of an oxymoron when you're talking about hosta. They die to the ground every year, and every year when they come up, they are a little bit bigger than they were the previous year.
You know, I said that I turned over the little pots on my mouse ears. The big hostas that Mary referred to at the shade garden, you can't, of course, turn over the oak tub, and so we felt around the perimeter top, stuck our fingers in, and when the plant got so big that you could not even get your finger in on the surface of the plant, surface of the dirt in that pot, we knew it was time to crowbar them out and divide them up, and they're wonderful.
And we did. We turned the pots, the big whiskey barrels, on their side and struggled to get those pots or those plants out. That plant. It started out with a single plant, believe it or not, when we got 5 out of it. That's one of the many, 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 many reasons I love hosta. The other main reason I love it so much is that you can have it in just about anywhere in your garden except full sun, and it'll do well depending upon which of the variations you choose. I grow them at home in the ground, and I grow them in pots. They're very forgiving. They're easy to grow. They're just a wonderful plant. One problem with hosta, they're not called deer candy for nothing. The deer love them. So the idea is that you give them something lower or away from your hosta that they really do like to eat, in hopes that they never get to the hosta. Usually by the time of year when I get some snow up here, the ones that have not died down to the ground already have been nibbled on by the deer that come up into my garden when they've taken care of all of the food that they have left in the forested area below me. We already talked about the farfugium that we have growing at the demonstration garden. Here's another, and I said it was previously known as a ligularia. The ligularia that you see here, I don't know if it has a common name. It really is a great shade plant, and it has lovely daisy-like flowers, as you can see, but it is also a moisture-loving plant, so you have to be cautious. If you have a low-lying area in your garden where you might have more moisture in other parts of your garden, you might grow it, or you can always plant it in a pot where you can provide it more moisture than you want to provide through irrigation. Some additional perennials we've already discussed. Some, the Liriope is wonderful. Lychnus chalcedonia is a great plant. It's known as Maltese cross. I love this particular one. It does like partial shade. There is another plant in the Lychnus family that is called Rose Campion and Dusty Miller, several other names for it. That particular Lychnus does propagate or spread a little bit through seed, and the birds love to spread that one. I have not found that so with the Maltese cross. I would mention cardinal flower. I've wanted to grow it for years, but I've never had an area in my yard that has enough water to it. It too is a moisture loving plant, usually found, it plants well along the edge of a stream bed, for example. Couple more bluebells that you'll see, nice plants. We don't have them growing at the demonstration garden, but they bring in the blue color, which is a rare color in flowers and plants. More of your perennials. Favorite of mine is the Salomon Seal. We have that growing at the Sherwood demonstration garden and fairly right under an oak, really. So it not directly under the oak, it's along the fence, but it gets a lot of deep shade because it has one oak that's inside the demonstration garden and some oaks that are growing on the college property behind us. And it does beautifully. It brought some beautiful little flowers to us in the springtime. Jacob's Ladder, I have tried several different times. I've also asked another gardener, master gardener, how she has done with Jacob's Ladder. She's had the same problem I did. It doesn't live for some reason or another. I've now tried it 3 times, so that's it, no more. But some of you may have the right conditions. I haven't had the right conditions. I can't even tell you what the right conditions are because I've been so unsuccessful. But ones I have been successful with, and we have also in the Sherwood demonstration garden, are the various primula or primrose. It's so wonderful to go out in your garden and see these blooming in the early spring. It just brings that, gets rid of some of that cabin fever. Pulmonaria, I already mentioned, it does quite well, and it will do better in deeper shade. Its common name lungwort leaves a little to be desired, but nevertheless, it's a nice plant. Tiarella, I mentioned earlier when talking about a heucherella. This is the plant that was actually propagated with a heuchera or a coral bell to create a heucherella. Tiarella is very nice, as is Tradiscantria Virginiana, another one that I really like. Spiderwort is its more common name. I've planted it for years, and it's a great. Somebody still is not on mute, and we're getting a feedback. Toad lily is an interesting common name, Tricertus hirta. The flowers are really very pretty. They're like a very miniature orchid. I've got them planted here at my house and they've done pretty well. We tried to plant them at the demonstration garden and I ended up putting them in an area that used to have a lot of shade because of an oak tree that is now down on the ground. So what we planted at the Sherwood demonstration garden will have to be transplanted in hopes that it will come back. Trillium, the one at the bottom that we mentioned earlier, is a nice woodland plant and will do well. It comes out in the springtime. Susan, it's up to you now. Onward to trees and shrubs.
All righty, trees and shrubs. How are we doing on time?
Poorly. It's now 10:30. We should go through this pretty fast so we can have time for a few questions.
Okay. Abelia is a shrub, 4 to 5 feet tall and deciduous, but it's a very pretty shrub. Japanese maple, I believe we may have already covered. They're gorgeous in the ground or in tubs. Strawberry tree, the arbutus has these wonderful fruits I believe in the fall, marginally palatable fruit, so beware. Wide range of climates and soils. Same family as manzanita, so that you know it's relatively durable. Next slide, please. And there we have the manzanita. Light shade and little to moderate water. You know, these guys are also natives. Needs good drainage, but can tolerate poor soil. It's wonderful for attracting birds. And of course, you probably know it's got beautiful, beautiful wood. And if you have the misfortune of having one and having it die, you know that it's very hot and good firewood. Japanese okuba is a variegated, usually, well, let's see, variegated or not foliage. I know this japonica is a relative of the gold dust plant, which is also an okuba, which has sprinkles of gold on the green leaves. This one, the japonica, grows moderately to 6 to 10 feet and has small, very small maroon flowers in the early spring. Azaleas, and which are part of the rhododendron family. The main differentiation I know between azaleas and rhododendrons is deer will not eat rhododendrons or should not eat rhododendrons, but they love azaleas. Regular to ample water on the azalea, and they come in a range of colors. They're just beautiful, beautiful plants. Azaleas and rhododendrons in the larger family fare best in filtered sunlight. Next slide, please. Butterfly bush. Now this, interestingly enough, is on a list. I don't have the link, but I can find it later for us, and we'll post it for you. There is a California state almost invasive list. So it's called a watch list. And butterfly bush, interestingly enough, along with violets, are on that watch list. Most people know these as having a wide range of beautiful colored flowers, from pink, purple, lots of different colors. They can be deciduous or evergreen. And of course, because of the name denotes that butterflies love them. So do hummingbirds. They resemble a lilac flower.
Unfortunately,
I'm sorry, go
they don't smell like the lilac flower.
Now they look like the lilac flower, sorry.
Don't smell like it, unfortunately.
And the calycanthus there on the right-hand side is native among streams and creek beds, moist slopes in the Coast Ranges and the Sierra. So that will tell you it needs regular water. Flowers mid to late spring or summer. And the flower is aromatic and spider-like. Camellias, almost everybody knows. We have one that's very much like this, a Mr. Tingley camellia, which unfortunately was planted at the side of the house, which now gets full sun. So it doesn't look this pretty. But they are a gorgeous and a pretty, do well with little supplemental water once they're established. You're supposed to protect them, of course, from strong hot sun and drying winds. There's over 3,000 named varieties with a wide range of colors. Next slide, please. Carpentaria, there you go, bush anemone. I actually had one of these and moved it this year because its feet were getting too wet. Happened to be growing up in a space where water drained off of a brick area. Californica indicates the bush anemone is a California native. Beautiful white big flowers, and we have one in the shade garden that you can see. Also, little to moderate water. Dogwood, we've actually covered several different species. Do well in our area. I find they always need filtered canopies, sun, although Mary mentioned rather than a filtered sun, they actually some can do well in sun. Next slide, please. We have in, I believe, in the shade garden, we have all three of these.
I know we have the bottom.
The two at the bottom. Okay. Transatlantica Eternal Fragrance is a gorgeous, gorgeous bush shrub. The Odura is one that I have at home, the winter daphne, and we ended up putting them in big tubs, and then they kind of grew right through the tub, and where their leaves hit sun, they retreat, and they get kind of crabby about that. But unlike the description in the Sunset Western Garden book that indicates that the winter daphne can die on the spur of the moment without you doing anything different, ours have been extremely durable. They tolerate a little bit of sun, but need to be kind of carefully shaded. They're under a canopy kind of plant. Next slide, please. Aurelia, Japanese Aurelia. Yes, okay, this is evergreen. These leaves are up to 16 inches wide. The plant is 5 to 8 feet tall and just as wide. And it does very well bordering a patio. And actually, the Western Garden book suggests that it actually is a good plant for shade near a pool, swimming pool. Again, the main appeal is these beautiful, big, glossy leaves. On the right, the coffee berry is also a Californica. So what does that mean? That means it is also a California native. Very good for attracting bees. The berries attract birds. It's not fussy about soil. Did I say evergreen? It's evergreen. It grows upright in shaded woodland, and it tends to be a little bit more draping in partial shade. Established plants need no water. Fuchsia, I believe we've covered. Heavy mulch protection needed on this particular variety for the cold weather. And on the lower right, gardenia. Some people can grow these. I cannot. I've seen this growing at 3,000 feet in a microenvironment and blooming beautifully. It just happened to be just in a pot in the right place. And most of you know that this has a gorgeous scent. Very beautiful plant and flower. Next slide, please. The silk tassel, Fremont silk tassel, no irrigation needed, it says. Partial shade plant. Native to the mountains of the West Coast and also in Arizona. Beautiful pendulous catkins, which are different on the male plant than they are on the female plant. Males are longer, more slender, and more decorative, quote unquote. So if you're looking for this type of flower on your Fremont silk tassel, you'll want the male plant. The snowdrop tree there on the right, part shade and regular water. Carolina, grows best in cool, deep, humus soil. It grows, oh, it's not a shrub. It grows 30 feet to 40 feet tall. Perfect for a woodland garden. Lower left there, the toyon is also a native to the coast ranges down to Baja California. It has small white flowers that are loved by the bees and followed in the summer by red or orange pea-sized berries loved by the birds. And it is a very valuable garden plant because of the attraction, the bees and the birds. Hydrangeas, that's my favorite. I talked about in the last presentation, part 1 of this series, that my lace cap hydrangea is my canary plant. That means that when the hydrangea wilts, I know that the rest of the garden needs water. It comes back very quickly with a deep watering. There are several types of hydrangeas that we have. I believe we have all these in the Sherwood demonstration garden. The Macrophyla, which is this one shown, which is the big leaf or the garden hydrangea, which is your grandmother's hydrangea plant. Can be like this, or it can be a lace cap, where the fertile flowers are the ones on the inside, and they're sterile flowers that are a different shape on the outside of the flower. We also have the Paniculata Hydrangea. It's a cone shape, white flowers that fade to amber in late summer and fall. I have one that I just am trying, which is called Limelight, which is a dwarf. I have Little Lime, which is a dwarf lime Paniculata hydrangea. So the flowers start out greenish white and fade to greenish pink. And the third one that we also have in the demonstration garden is the Quercufolia Percifolia, which is the oak leaf. I think we have Sykes Dwarf, which is a really pretty 3-foot tall oak leaf hydrangea. It also has a more cone-like flower that starts out white, goes to pink, and can even end up sort of burgundy in some of the plants. It has fall leaf color, and mine tend to be really durable. So that means that they can stand a little bit more sunlight, filtered sunlight, than the other two. Next slide, please. Okay, Italian or Chinese holly. Okay, Ilex cornuta. And the upper left there is an evergreen shrub or tree. Large, long-lasting berries on the cornuta. And it prefers rich, slightly acidic soil. I have one that I really keep trying to move, although it's got too big a trunk, and it's actually planted right next to the rhododendron. Partial shade on that one too. Italian jasmine on the right, moderate to regular water, light shade, evergreen shrub. It has clusters of fragrant yellow flowers, hence the name jasmine, on willowy shoots up to 20 feet long. So the shoots on this plant will actually vine. They don't climb, but they grow tall and then they drape. But you can tie them into place. And on the bottom, jasmine. Very beautiful. You guys probably all know the scent of the jasmine. The Floridum requires moderate to regular water, and this one grows to 5 feet tall. Oh, I beg your pardon. It says scentless, as in no scent, yellow flowers. So the flowers are pretty, but they don't have the jasmine scent. Is that true, Mary? Do you know?
I can't swear to that, Susan.
I don't know this plant very well, but my notes say that it has no scent. Okie dokie, next slide, please. Upper right is the sweet bay, from whence we get our bay leaves for cooking. It is a evergreen shrub or tree that grows slowly to 12 to 40 feet tall. Leathery aromatic leaves, and small yellow spring flowers that are followed by black or purple fruit. It actually, believe it can stand temperatures to below 20 degrees. Oh no, I'm sorry. It does not stand temperatures below 20 degrees. So if you have this, it's best to have it in a large pot for its youth. and move it into a bright light shelter for the wintertime. I know this tree mostly from Lafayette, California, the Bay Area, Girl Scout camp. So beautiful, beautiful big groves in the, would be the East Bay. Caria, Chinese fringe flower, japonica, is an evergreen shrub also, 6 to 10 feet tall. Flowering heaviest in the spring, but some bloom is likely anytime, which may actually be the warm days in November. You kind of never know. Okay, we'll hurry. It says that somebody is saying it's 10:45. Okay, let's skip to the next page. The next slide, rather. Okay, here's your Oregon grape that somebody was asking about. This is simply the shrub variety of the Mahonia. Next to it is Nandina, which is a great, actually doesn't need a whole lot of water at all, Domestica. Little to regular water, partial shade. Very ferny, beautiful foliage on that. And the Pieris japonica is an evergreen shrub also. Same cultural requirements as a rhododendron or an azalea, so acid soil. Next slide, please.
Susan, if I could break in just a moment.
Sure.
We're running really, really short on time.
Okay.
So if you could maybe just touch on a slide, on a picture or on a plant per slide.
Right. The only thing that I will say about rhododendrons in this slide is that they are now developing rhododendron species that do well in our area. So they're developing rhododendrons for dry area. Let's go to the next slide. Sweetbox, I believe Mary's already talked about, and Spirea also. Snowberry, Mollus is a scientific name for the soft vegetation. Let's see, soft deciduous shrub, little to moderate water for the snowberry. So that's a good one for our climate. Next slide, please. Yew is a tree. Conifers that don't bear cones comprise the yew family. More tolerant of shade or moisture than most cultivated conifers. Western yew is native to moist places in California. Let's move to the next, probably last slide. Dutchman's pipevine is a favorite in the Sherwood demonstration garden. It's also the host plant for the the pipevine swallowtail, which is a beautiful metallic blue swallowtail butterfly. And you see the flower there, which gives the plant its name. Trumpet vine, most of us know, and wisteria, most of us know. Now, wisterias can also be invasive, and they have to be supported from birth by a very strong trellis or overhead, not lath, but something with big, huge posts and a strong cover, because they get very, very heavy. And that's it for vines.
All right, at this point, I believe we've finished and we can turn it over to Pam for a couple of questions that are still outstanding. So Pam?
Hey, thank you both. I was the one that kept typing in there, reminding you guys what time it was, so I apologize for that. At this point, we are going to wrap up the class, and those of you that want to log off, you certainly can. We're going to answer the questions that are still outstanding. Mary and Susan answered a bunch of them already. One of them was somebody had asked for a photo of Plumeria, and Tracy has posted a link on the chat to the photo of Plumeria.
Pam, could I just interject just a moment? We'll also post, I think I mentioned it earlier, but the presentation itself is going to be posted as a PDF And there is also a handout. It's a fairly significantly sized handout, but it does have descriptions of each of the plants and pictures. So that will also be posted on our website.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I have a question for you, Mary, which was answered in the chat, but not by either one of you. So are trilliums native to our area?
I don't believe so. I think they're more of an East Coast native. I'd have to double check on that though.
Okay.
I will, what I can do is recommend looking at Calflora or Las Colitas Nursery, specializes in natives.
Okay, that helps. Now this one is for Mary. And the question is, living in Elk Grove, I get a lot of afternoon sun. Other than permanent cover or use of an umbrella, does anyone have a visual source of what people are using? So I was wondering whether or not you had a website or some place that you could direct her to see what other visual sources would be for that.
Offhand, I don't know of a specific website that will look at that, but Google does wonderful searches for you. They're refining their searches all the time. Shade cloth is always not an umbrella, but the variations of shade cloth that you can get. You can get some interesting looking ones, some that are triangular in shape and different colors that you could use. Those can always be used on poles to bring in some additional shade. And I didn't have an example when we were talking about it earlier, I think in the first part of the presentation, but shade cloth is probably a good one.
Okay, that works. Okay, so Susan, there's a question about fuchsias being considered annuals. Could you explain more about that?
I believe they're considered annuals mostly because of the extremes of our climate in El Dorado County. You have a situation where a fuchsia and, those waxy begonias do not survive in cold. So if you have a greenhouse and you have your plant, the fuchsia, in a pot, I would consider moving it inside or at least under a porch where it gets some light in the wintertime, but is protected from the cold. Also, mulching in the roots will help.
Okay. And again, for Susan, does blue sedge die off at 3,500 feet elevation?
3,500 feet. Okay, so that's about 500 feet higher than I am, and I can grow blue sedge in the open in my garden. So I would believe that it would withstand a 3,500 foot elevation if it had heavy mulch. We're talking like cardboard over the ground or straw or, heavy bark or something to protect the roots from freezing. And also, I don't think that you need to cover them. I'm guessing you do not need to cover them. You just need to protect the roots.
I grow sedge and I'm at 4,000 feet. I was just trying to check in the garden book to see if, in Western Garden Book, to see if I grow blue sedge. I don't. I grow a form of variegated sedge, and it does fine at 4,000.
Okay. Susan, is the yerba buena plant that you showed the one used in the Mexican cooking dish called albondigas?
Oh, you would have to ask a cook. I am fortunate to have a husband that loves the kitchen, and so I really don't know. We normally as master gardeners don't recommend using any plants for human ingestion, but we have done so in this presentation when we're absolutely sure. I don't know about the yerba buena. So that would be a matter for a Google search.
Oh, okay. Mary,
Yes, ma'am.
so even planting in pots under oak trees, the pots drain water. So does this drainage disturb the oaks?
Depends upon how much the plants take up in the pot. If you have a single plant in the middle of, let's, a 21-inch whiskey barrel, and you only put a plant that's got roots that are going to go down in the center of that, then yes, you have to be concerned about water dripping down through the drainage holes and into the ground itself. But the way we planted under the oaks at the demonstration garden, we actually had other things growing around the house stuff when we first put it in, so that the water was pretty much consumed and taken up by the plant's roots before it ever got to the point of drainage. So we didn't run into the problem of getting additional water to the oaks. So it's one of those, unfortunately, that it depends on what you put in the pots.
Okay. And Susan, is there a shrub dogwood?
Not that I know of. Do you know, Mary? Mary's nodding, so I would say yes. Mary?
Yeah, red twig dogwood's not really considered a tree. It's more of a shrub. Even there's a native dogwood. I'm trying to remember all of the various botanical names, but yeah, there are several. Yellow twig is another one.
Now, Mary, when you say that those are more a shrub dogwood, does that mean that they would grow in a shrub shape without you pruning, or do you have to shape them?
No, you don't have to shape them. We've got a red twig at the demonstration garden that had multiple branches to it. It hasn't grown very tall. Dogwood or cornus is very prolific. There are many different types, so you almost have to look to see which one's going to suit your situation.
Okay, so to either one of you, which of the Sunset Western Garden books do you recommend? There are many.
I would get the current edition if you don't have it at this point. Susan?
I buy the most current annual version, or if, you know, I should say semi-annual. Every year or two, one comes out. And it's the new Sunset Western Garden book, The Ultimate Gardening Guide. It's the big, heavy one. So it's not to be confused with the wonderful Sunset books that come out that are lighter, narrower, and more narrow in focus.
The most current edition has some flowers showing on the bottom, almost along the bottom, and then has a great big, I can't tell for sure, looks like a zinnia perhaps, but it is definitely
on the front. This one was published in 2012, but I think it might actually be one of the most recent ones. I haven't seen a newer one.
This is the most current. If you were to go out on Amazon or one of those places and get it, you would get the most current. It was originally published in 2012, and there have been, this is the 9th edition.
Okay, that's the end of the questions that I have, because you guys already answered the rest of them during the presentation. Do either one of you have anything that you want to say to wrap up the class?
Just a big thank you to everyone for your patience. This is, as I said in the first part of this, that it was our original of the Zoom classes and the Facebook live stream. So our timing was off a little bit. We appreciate your patience, and don't hesitate to contact your master gardeners, either those of us who are in El Dorado County or in the counties that you're located in, for any additional questions. Tracy, over to you.
And I wanted to also mention, I think we mentioned it before, but it bears repeating that this video recording is available on Facebook. And also you can find a link, I believe, on the Master Gardener homepage, which is mgeldorado.com. And also we were going to put the list of plants and pictures up on that site also, I believe, right, Mary?
That is correct.
So we went through the names really fast, but you can find all that stuff with the video on the, Tracy has put it up in chat there, the UCANR Master Gardener homepage. Thank you very much, all you guys, for coming.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Susan. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Pam. Wonderful class. And you guys have a good time gardening. This is a perfect time to plant. And we'll see you at our next Master Gardener class. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Right.
I have a quick question for you guys. Is there a way that we could post answers to the questions, or is that just too laborious?
We tried that earlier, I think, with another class, and it gets to be very difficult to maintain that.
We found it was just too cumbersome on the web page itself. If you look at it now, there's already with all the classes, there's so much. So what I did with, I think it was the veggie class that Mary helped with, I emailed all of the answers out to the folks that registered.
Wow.
Because they had asked for it, and we told them
Yeah.
we'd do that.
I didn't
So.
realize that. Tracy, we're still showing 3 people or 4 people in the.
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you, Mary.
We're still showing 4 people in the waiting room or on the participant list.
So at the end of these classes, I like to just check in really quick with you guys and tell you thank you and good job. And so I move all those extra people into the waiting room
Okay.
so that they can't see or hear us. Ha ha ha. Power I yield. Well,
In with us because we've got 7 participants at this point.
right. But there's just us 4 that are in the meeting. So great job, you guys. I think you did an excellent job. I was salivating over all those plants.
Me too. Those pictures were wonderful.
Yeah. Pam, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Anything you can think of from the host perspective?
No, I don't think so. I think that, I haven't figured out how to, when the slides are actually showing, I haven't figured out how to toggle between that and the Word document to copy and paste the questions. So I just typed it on my laptop next to me. So I don't know if there's a way to do it, but I'll figure it out.
There is, and it's kind of challenging. That's why I like to have 2 screens so that I don't have to keep finding, because I think that Zoom shrinks and you have to make it pop back up.
Right.
You have to toggle back and forth. So look and see if it's become like this tiny icon on your desktop.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the right-hand corner, or maybe it's lower right-hand corner, there's a green X a green arrow, and you can open it back up.
Okay.
So play with it. Let me know if that works. Hopefully it does.
Okay.
When I did Zach's class, I kept a Word document active all the time, especially the second part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't keep a full screen, up in the upper right-hand corner where you can go to full screen.
Yeah.
I kept mine smaller than that and just adjusted the size so that I could keep the Word document open also.
Okay.
So it was pretty easy when I got it set up. It took a moment or 2 to set it up.
Right.
So that's on the upper part of the full screen?
No, it's on the upper part once your screen shrinks. So if you guys want to play with it right now, go to your upper right-hand corner and then shrink your screen.
Okay.
There's, if you go into speaker view, it really pretty much fills up the screen. But if you,
Right, that was my husband who's waiting outside. I told him we'd be done about, 10, 15.
Yeah, unless you